A couple of years ago, Simon Sinek kind of threw the world a curveball when he started talking about the whys of an organization, and that for many decades, organizations have focused on what they do and how to do it, but not on why, not on the purpose behind it. And so that's kind of a new trend we're seeing, which is pretty cool. Where, even in the case of, you might be deciding between two potential job candidates, and one is highly qualified and another one is less qualified, but understands your why and connects with the purpose of the organization. Well, you should hire that person because there's going to be much more synergy, and it's just going to flow much better. So I think the same has kind of happened with the church. We focus sometimes too much on how to practice, how to just we get into a routine of things, and we don't spend enough time reevaluating, why are we doing this? Why am I alive? What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of my Christianity? And especially, we need to evaluate that as a community so that we're making sure to be going forward in the same direction with the same goals as a community. Because if we aren't, then if we have no why, if we have no purpose, well, that's just shallow. And if we do understand what our purpose is, but we go against it and we act against it and against its favor, well, then that's just hypocrisy. So if there's anything I can leave you with from this video, it would be the hope that you would be inspired to just evaluate what your objectives are, what the objectives are for Christianity in your mind, and then from there to build your lifestyle and your perspective. And that's what I hope to do. Is I'm going to share my perspective on this issue, and then in subsequent videos the idea is to focus a little bit more on the how to achieve these goals. In James 1, it says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. I'm going to just go to another chapter in the Gospels of Matthew 25. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, basically the day of judgment, he separates people into two groups. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we do all these things?" And then he replies, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." So I think that's pretty amazing that a lot of these people who are achieving what I would consider to be some of the goals of Christianity didn't even realize that they were doing it for the Lord, because their purpose was so sincere in doing these things. But I mean, notice the stranger. Sometimes people have interpreted that as the immigrant, but obviously the hungry, those in need, the sick, those in hospitals, the imprisoned, literally criminals who are in prison. They need our ministry as well. And Jesus talks about loving our enemies. He says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But what I say to you is love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And so in these passages, I think what it comes down to is obviously love, but also to restoration. And as believers, part of our hope is we believe that there will be the restoration of all of creation, and the restoration of our bodies. We await that. And we also wait for the restoration of our relationship with God, for that to be perfect, where there's no more blurriness. We can see him clearly. And for the restoration of all of our relationships. These are things we hope for. And so I think that our goal is to kind of be ambassadors of that future restoration that is to come by exemplifying a restoration in little ways and in little moments in life. And we're going to constantly be having this pull of our humanity to basically kind of pull us down. And we have to be aware of the fact that we're imperfect, and we're always going to be imperfect. We're always going to be broken. But at the same time, and that's the flesh. That's the flesh. But the Spirit pulls us in the opposite direction. The Spirit pulls us towards love. It pulls us towards hope. It pulls us towards faith. It pulls us towards forgiveness. And these particular passages, I believe that these are really good to keep an eye on, because they speak to loving those who are in great need. And the other one I mentioned from Matthew 5 about loving your enemies, loving even your enemies. So loving people you don't conventionally love. The neighbor is the people in your circle, your family, your friends, the people around you. They're usually not that hard to love. You know, obviously there's always challenges and drama within the close relationships of our lives, but they're not as hard to love as, say, an orphan. By the very definition of an orphan, they don't have close family. They don't have somebody there. They're in a position of weakness. And if we can get to a level of love and stability and strength in ourselves to be able to have something to give beyond our own circle to those who are in need, who have no other recourse, that is an awesome goal. And I don't think that it's easy to argue against that. And I think that one of the cool things about Christianity is that we can partner with people of all kinds of faiths and philosophies to endeavor to achieve these goals, because these goals are common amongst many, if not all, religions. You can be a secular humanist, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Muslim, and desire these same things. So, but I do want to kind of draw your attention to another passage, which I think is possibly the most important verses in the whole Bible, and it is in Mark 12. So when asked about what was the greatest commandment, Jesus responded that it is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. So if we just skip to the second commandment for a second, once again, it's really hard to argue against that. If we can just do that really well, to love our neighbors as ourselves, if we can accomplish that, that's just fantastic. I mean, a lot of people make Christianity very complicated, and it is a big book, the Bible. But I personally believe that if we just focus all of our attention on these two verses and we do them well, we will not have done poorly in life. And you know, a lot of times it's more about doing well with the little knowledge you have than constantly trying to turn another corner and obtain more knowledge. Knowledge is good and knowledge is inevitable, but it's more important to do well and practice well with the knowledge you have. So these verses are really important for that. But going back to that first commandment, so if you're an unbeliever, can you really love? Well, I would say that, you know, Dorothy Day, she was a Catholic anarchist in the 1920s, a very interesting woman. She said, I really only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. And, you know, as many of us know, when we're dating, one of the best indicators of a good partner is if they treat the waiter or the waitress well at the restaurant. And I think we have kind of a deep understanding of the fact that, you know, if they treat them poorly, they're probably going to, in the end, treat me poorly as well, even if they're treating me well now. This is just a really good metaphor where we can kind of take a couple of different characters and put them in the place of our partner, and a couple different other characters and put them in the place of the waiter or the waitress. And so, of course, if we have our partner here is our neighbor maybe, but the waitress is an orphan, you know, we can't really love our partner unless we love the orphans. You know, if the waiter is our enemy, we can't really fully love our partner unless we love our enemies. Or in another way, you could say, the more that you are capable of finding love within your heart for even your enemies, the greater your love for your partner who loves you back is going to be, right? So now, what if the person who is the waiter is actually God? So if you treat God with hate, then you will not be able to really love your fellow man. So if you're an atheist or an agnostic, just make sure that you don't hate God. Because if you hate God, you're actually expressing that you believe in God enough to hate him. So I would say rather just be certain that you're really confident that you don't know about whether he exists or not, or be confident that he doesn't exist. Because if your thoughts about God involve bitterness or anger, that's going to have a hampering effect on your ability to love your fellow man. But you know what, it actually goes both ways, because if you believe that you love God, and maybe God is your partner, but then, well, if the waiter is the rest of mankind, you know, you can't really truly love God unless you love people. So it all intertwines, and I would say that, you know, the lowest common denominator of your love, who you love the least, whether it's your neighbor, God, your enemy, or somebody weak and in need like an orphan, that really is sheds light on your real character and how deep your love is. So back to that passage in James, if pure religion is to be able to take care of the weak, you know, I think that in order to get there, we have the quality of our love for our neighbor has to be so high, to love our neighbor as ourselves, to love ourselves as well. That all needs to be so high so that we're getting to a point where our cup is so overflowing that our love is even arriving to the poor and the weak. But the goals of Christianity are to love. That's the main goal.